right, Howie, so we're coming off of the Sunday sermon in the book of Acts, chapter 15, and you're talking about things that you find strangely comforting. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, off of Sunday, just thinking through life, we all have these different things that maybe it could be from our childhood where we sort of try to relive even as adults, because when those things happened, it brought this comfort sort of to the soul or the peace of mind. So like I mentioned, even for me, I like just getting in my car, going to my hometown, listening to 80s classics.
80s classics in
I
Georgetown?
know, right? I have all these memories that come up as you sort of go down the streets and that. And then I love driving my Mustang. It's a standard. So there's something about just shifting into gears, listening to that 80s music, be it Corey Hart, Never Surrender. Or
Oh man, that's my childhood.
stuff like that.
Boy in the Box.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then I just find sitting in the car, having those moments, it might sound strange because you're somewhat going back, but then it's like just brings that peace or that comfort, and there's lots of other things that people might find comforting, like people like to, for example, go outside when it's pouring rain, but it's humid and the rain's coming down, and they
Like
love
the
the
smell
feel
of the rain.
the
Yeah.
smell, the feel of the rain on their face. So I go, there's some things that if we were all being honest, we'd go, it's somewhat strange, but it brings comfort. Ultimately, people are sort of longing for, like, I want to live my life. I want to sort of have a peace in my life, a peace of mind. And that's why I think some of these things that are sort of like listening to the rain hit the roof when you're sleeping, or a hot cup of coffee or tea, and people love to hold the hot cup, right? Like, like
My
that.
fur dad mug here.
Yeah. So I go, those things just bring comfort. So then when it comes to scripture and what we read, and sort of thinking through, like, a lot of these men and women in scripture, they're no different than you and me. And they do things at times that can be sinful, and we have this sort of view that, oh, you're Christians, you should be perfect, and you should have everything in order, and you should know how to treat each other. So that's why in this passage I somewhat find that strangely comforting, that we have a Paul who is probably the greatest missionary.
He's like the pastor's hero. He's like the hero in every story, yeah.
Yeah, and so he's that guy. And then you got Barnabas, who I picture Barnabas as that super spiritual, nice, kind guy in our churches, where I don't think he could do anything wrong. And then when I read...
We'll call him the associate pastor.
Yeah. But then when you read this passage that Paul and Barnabas would get into, like, when you study it out, it's like a really big fight over...
And what would that look like then? I try to picture that, go into my mind's eye, like what we deal with today with a fight, whereas we would, there's people that fight on Twitter, then there's people that fight, on Facebook, and then there's the silent treatment fights, and then there's the gossip fights, and then there's the face-to-face.
Yeah.
But this would have been more a face-to-face.
Yeah, and I don't think it was a fight where it's like they're throwing punches at each other. However, I think people knew who were around, especially even John Mark there, because that's who the dispute's over.
Yeah, bringing him on the journey, right?
What? Yeah. That Barnabas wants him to come along, Paul doesn't. So I'm like, people knew that they had beef anyways. Yeah. And I think that was the thing, was like two spiritual giants somewhat of our faith. And I go, that's strangely comforting, because here we are, right, in our churches, and at times conflict arises, and then disputes happen, and you would go, why couldn't those be handled a lot better? And yet they have a fight, and God still is over it. God's still leading and guiding through his Spirit. And that's what I just find when I read scripture. I'm like, that brings comfort to my soul.
They separate ways, but they're still leading, and they're still in leadership. that doesn't diminish. One doesn't try to ruin the other. They part ways, but there was a piece to that who Barnabas was bringing along, that there was some connection, though, right? Did you want to talk about that, the family connection?
Yeah, I think the sort of debate here between Barnabas and John Mark is some people think that Barnabas might be John Mark's uncle, but when you sort of study it, I believe it's referring more to they were cousins. So you have some family relation, and I go sometimes family. You just stand with your family, even if they're wrong at times. I've seen that over and over, especially here on a small island like Prince Edward Island. I find the family connection, it's like when you're in family, even if you know your family's wrong, people just tend to still go over and side with family for some reason.
Yeah, as if the whole blood is thicker than water thing, we've talked about a few times before, but yeah, so you're taking a side for the sake of taking a side. Then it's not that truth needs to prevail in a situation, and rebuke and repentance doesn't get called necessarily in today's day and age. It's all about picking a side. We see it in politics, we see it in church, we see it in family life, where you'll side with somebody if you have the same burr in your saddle, for a lack of a better term. So it doesn't necessarily mean that truth prevails all the time. And that's the struggle in a church setting, and that's how splits can happen, right? Mm-hmm. I'm with them because I get along with them.
Yeah.
Doesn't even mean they're right, but you can sometimes justify their wrongness and try to make it seem righteous, just because you're upset.
That's a good point. Yeah, and we don't really know, like, this is a part of scripture where you sort of go, what was it like when John Mark left the journey? Your mind sort of goes, I wonder why he left. And it was we know it was a disagreement, most likely with Paul on something. But then I go, here he is coming back, and I go, because I have this view of Barnabas as a super nice, kind guy, going, come on, Paul, just sort of let him back in, give him a chance,
The gracious one.
Yeah, and at the same time, knowing the family connection and all of that, and then Paul just stands his ground, and he's like, no way.
Yeah, if he's coming, he's going with you.
Basically, it's those things where it's like, if you're Barnabas, if you're going to come with me, he can't come. And then, that sort of gets my mind thinking, like, what was it ultimately that John Mark, disagreed with, maybe with Paul, and then he sort of left the field. Some people think maybe the mission field was too hard for John Mark, but I sort of, as I read it and think about it, I think I lean more towards it's probably they disagreed over something. Maybe even in Acts 13, Bar Jesus, he was highly respected of the Jews, but he was teaching a false gospel, and Paul basically he got blind. Paul said, "You're now blind," and I don't know if maybe John Mark was like, why were you so hard on that guy? So that's speculation and all of that. But whatever that was that left John Mark to go, I'm leaving this, but then to come back, I just see Barnabas being the encourager, like, come on, John Mark, let's do this. And yeah, Paul's like, no.
Well, and the interesting thing is, even with that, we'll call it division, it doesn't derail the gospel.
Yeah, and I think it's, if we could see that we're just broken people and that we won't do everything perfectly. We at times even look back, and if we critique even ourselves, we go, I think I could have maybe handled that situation better.
That's every conversation in my head after every conversation that I don't think goes well.
Yeah, so then I go, but in order to have that perspective, you need to have grace. So you need to be living from a perspective of grace, right? That, all right, if we're messed up and we're broken, at times people are going to do things that hurt us. I'm going to do things at times that hurt other people. Like, if we all can see that in the church, sort of, I'll use the term culture, in our church culture, that we just see we're broken people. No one's going to hit a home run every time.
And also, and again, this is just a random thought. While you're explaining all this, I'm picturing scenarios, and I'm thinking about just how sensitive people are now. Do you think we've come into a time when people don't necessarily even understand or know how to respond to anything, any conflict? Because I find that at the sign of any disagreement somebody has with you in the church, you abandon ship. And we get that, what we call the Charlottetown Shuffle in PEI, where if things don't go my way, if I can't control it, if people don't pat me on the back enough, I'm going to just take my bat and ball and run, instead of entering in and just being part of community because I want to be there, not because I need glory or position or power or whatever, fill in the blank.
Yeah, and I think maybe what's happened is we've elevated our preference of what we think or whatever that view is that we have, and we go, everyone should have that sort of view, or everyone should have my perspective. And I think what we've done is, instead of keep it down here, we've elevated it up even to like the big things, like theological discussion on what do you believe about God, what do you believe about the Bible. Like those are major things, but we've brought up our preference of, whatever it is. I think the sound shouldn't be as loud, and it's up here with, is Jesus God?
Yes. Or end times because there's world conflict right now.
Yeah.
It's got to be now, as if it hasn't happened in the past.
Yeah, and if you don't have that perspective that Jesus is going to return right within the next few years, and even though the Bible would say we don't know the times or the date that will take place, but I think what happens is whenever those things arise, there are people who will, I don't want to get involved in that, and they'll just shuffle over. But I find maybe in our context and culture on PEI is if we allow the enemy too much foothold in this, we go for the throat. Like people aren't just satisfied to move on. They want to try to destroy as they leave. So it's like, well, if you don't see it my way or do things my way, I'm going to try to take you down. Rather than, okay, we just disagree on this issue. So I've had people over the years, even I still remember someone making the statement to me that you don't even believe the Bible. And I was like, really?
The King James Bible.
I've been a pastor like for over 21 years now, and a Christian for 40. And I'm like, if I don't believe the Bible, I wouldn't be doing these things. So rather than just go, we disagree on this topic or this issue, it goes to the point of, now I'm going to tell people, you as a pastor don't believe the Bible. And I think that's why some people don't want to get involved in conflict when it goes deep, and then others go too deep, and then they just try to destroy. And it all depends, right, how the enemy works, how Satan works, because he can take those things and divide, and people start believing things that
and that division bleeds into church leadership. If you don't have a strong, humble, repentant, constantly evaluating church leadership, then you can build this tribalism, like I mentioned, the Charlottetown Shuffle, where people build suspicion, and then leadership can embrace suspicion, and then it becomes an us versus them, where it's those guys over there, and that's what that church does, and we'll never serve together. It's one thing to not serve together because your practices don't fall in line with your beliefs, but it's another thing to show grace and mercy for the small things, like you said. Like people are more expressive at that church, while we're more subdued. You can still get along. Yeah.
And I think, like, for example, if you and I had an argument, and let's just say, all right, today we have this huge argument, we go our separate ways. Like I'm going to, on Sunday preach God's word, but let's just say some people will respond to that, and let's say you go off and you're like, I'm gonna, because you play and work, like you do praise and worship, you play and sing, and then you go off and you do sort of a worship set, and then you share the gospel, and people hear about Jesus and come to Jesus. So I'm like, even in it, God takes our mess and he makes something of it. So even in the passage, we have Barnabas and John Mark go off and they do their own thing, and Paul takes Silas and he goes off and they do their thing.
So Paul didn't try to shut them down or disqualify them.
They had a disagreement. And yet I'm sure God's heart is unity.
Right.
But in this moment, they didn't have that. Later, we know they do.
Yeah.
They come back to the table, and I think Paul even says, John Mark's coming. And basically, he's a good guy. Listen to what he says. So eventually reconciliation comes around, which is awesome. But in this moment, I'm like, God's like, all right, I'm God and I'll do whatever I want.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Because even God actually shows a vision to Paul, and he changes direction at one point. But before we get into that, looking back to the whole context of what we came out of with the circumcision party, or they'll call it the Pharisees party, where they're trying to force the Gentiles into the religious practice of the Jews. And that was kind of Timothy's example. Did you want to explain that a bit?
Yeah, I think when we're reading that, we could skip over it in a way. It's because I don't know about you, but whenever I read circumcision in the Bible, I'm like, oh.
It makes me feel uncomfortable.
And even when you're preaching, and it's like, all right, the major issue in this time right now is the Gentiles need to get circumcised, like right. the male Gentiles, if they're going to be true Christians, this has to happen.
And that was they were trying to make an edict about that as the Jewish leaders. Yeah. So a faction of the leadership, and then you had these new leaders like Paul saying, "Hang on a second, the old is gone, the new has come. Jesus and the Holy Spirit is for all people. Therefore, the Gentiles don't need to convert in some different way because Jesus accomplished all of that." Yeah. So it's interesting how that all plays out then, with and not to get too deep into the previous passage, but where they actually had to spend time. They actually submitted to the conversations with the leadership. They didn't just try to be rogue rebels in the process. They actually allowed the debate. That's what I found interesting in the context of it, is that Paul, who was driving with Jesus, still paused and had the conversation. He could have said, "No, God told me otherwise. You guys go away."
Exactly, yeah.
So I found that interesting in that context. Yeah. But then how does that play out with how they make this decision for Timothy in that context?
See, and I think it plays out this way because they're going to mainly go in and in this circumstance, this situation, they're going to share the gospel with a bunch of Jewish people who might sort of get caught up in the fact, because Timothy's mom, right, is Jewish, his dad's Greek. So in the end, Paul's basically saying to Timothy, for the sake of the gospel, it might be more effective since your mom's Jewish, even for you to be circumcised, because that won't even be an issue. So when you're sharing about Jesus and the gospel and freedom, no one's going to get caught up on the fact that we have an uncircumcised guy here trying to tell us, and especially if they're still caught up in that, which we find through the whole New Testament. This is a constant repeat and debate among the Jews and the Gentiles who would be coming to Christ. So Timothy, I think the sacrifice he makes in this situation is for the betterment of the gospel. So he's going, I'll do this because I know the gospel will go freely and I won't be a stumbling block in that way. So that got me thinking through, like, what sacrifices would I be willing to sort of lay aside? So from time to time, I've gone into other churches and I've preached, and someone like one of the leaders who's booking me might say, when you come preach, would you mind, wearing a tie, or,
the King James Bible, or,
yeah. So if it's even that, right? Like, I did a kids club one time in Quebec, and it was a King James only church. Yeah. So rather than go, well, I don't believe what you guys are holding to there, I was like, absolutely, I'll teach out of the King James version. It's a great version of the Bible as well. So I'm not against that. And I think even when I go into a setting, I'd go, I'll wear a suit, I'll preach, because the gospel is powerful. and it's powerful if I'm in jeans and a t-shirt or if I'm in a suit. So I think there's things as you're on mission for Jesus where you're like, my style, my preference of even music, I'm willing to sort of lay that aside and just go for the sake of the glory of God and Jesus's message. I will not push anything. I'm not going to go, no, I'm not coming because I want to wear what I normally wear. And I think those are the things as we think through our lives, like what are we willing? Like Timothy here is willing to do that, but like what am I willing to do, in a way, suck up?
Yeah, well, submission and humility are the least practiced traits, unfortunately, in a lot of environments, and not just Christianity, because these are virtues that can happen in a non-Christian environment, in businesses. When there is humility and submission, or just letting somebody else talk, submitting to a conversation, submitting to a directive. Let's take it into the business world. There's so much more power, which is a biblical truth, so much more power when you can translate that into the world that people don't know how to react. They all of a sudden they see a character shift in somebody because there's kindness, respect, mercy, patience, like all the fruits of the Spirit fleshed out. And so what better way to portray that when they're going into a new place where they're going to preach the gospel, to say, you know what, I don't want to be a stumbling block, so I'm not going to be a jerk about this. Yeah. And that's what we see here. So Howie, as we try to land the plane here, let's talk about Lydia and the circumstance where Paul is introduced to Lydia, maybe some context around what's happening in the passage.
Yeah, I always view and I think we can view Paul this way, where Paul's just like, he seems like this unstoppable beast in a way for the glory of God and the mission of God. So he's on mission all the time, and he wants to go into Asia. The Spirit of God somehow says no. We don't know if that was just maybe the Spirit, a sense in his heart that we shouldn't go, or if...
Because the passage says vision, right? It doesn't say he was asleep and had a dream in the middle of the night and was awakened.
Yeah, it says and that came later. So the Spirit says no to Asia, but then he has this vision of a man from Macedonia. And from that, if he was, right, if he woke up and said, all right, this is what we're doing, all we know is it was basically immediate obedience from Paul, and it
was like an affirmation of sorts.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't what he wanted to do.
Not at all, right? So then I go, that can be somewhat discouraging when maybe, even if we think through our lives and what we have some, be it dreams and plans, and then what happens when God sort of hits the brakes. Yeah. And we're like, it's somewhat discouraging. But then I go, I think what we got to do is think, well, God's got a bigger plan, a better plan. So here Paul gets this vision after that, and then he goes and he encounters a lady by the name of Lydia. And Lydia is actually from Asia. Right. So God said no to Asia, but here's this lady who's actually from there, but she's living in Philippi.
Mm-hmm. And so she's a remnant from the place he really wants to go. Yeah.
And she hears about Jesus and the good news. I think she was probably a God-fearer from the context of that day. So she was probably hanging around, the synagogues and all of that.
Yeah, because sometimes, and sorry to interrupt you, but sometimes when I picture people, Scripture just seems so absolute. This happened, then that happened, then this happened, then that happened. And it just talks about her being converted without a whole lot of backstory on how she got to that point. It's not like just bam, God says you're going to be saved. There would have been her listening in the synagogue, her listening to teachers, and then she was ripe for the picking.
Yeah.
And then she meets these guys.
Yeah. And I think if we could think of it that way, right? Like how here's God who is over everything, and he has a reason to say no, to tell Paul no to Asia. Yeah. And I think God's lining this up, and it's so encouraging. Here's just one lady, but God is now bringing Paul to Lydia, and she's going to hear Paul and believe Jesus and become a Christian for the very first time. So she knows, she's curious, she hears some things, but now her life is going to be changed. Not only that, she's going to be baptized, and it says her household. So it's like, here's something where it's super discouraging for Paul, but now I go, he's probably super pumped on mission for Jesus. And Lydia comes to know Jesus. And again, this passage just opens up my mind to go, who is it that might be a Lydia in my life or in your life or in the people's lives of our churches? Because God might be leading you in a way away from something because he's got a plan over here. So I think trying to learn to live with that flexibility of like the Spirit's leading is.
Doesn't this describe church planting?
Well, it should.
Because I mean, you've done this for a good portion of your ministry life now of church planting, and that's what this sounds like. It's you take a path and then you get stopped, derailed, or paused, and then you have to pivot. But you want to pivot based on what God wants, not man.
Yeah.
So it's not about how can I get more people in the least amount of time and then bringing money and resources with them. It's how do I reach people? And if this isn't the right place or time, you have to be willing to submit and be humble to say, this is not the right path. We need to turn. It might be either pausing, waiting, or stopping and going in a different direction. Because that's, as you were saying that, it was just reminding me of even what we experience as, we'll call a restart in Charlottetown as Centerpoint. Yeah, sorry to derail you there.
No, it's a great thought because ultimately, right, a church is birthed because Lydia comes to know Jesus because the church, she's going to host the church in her home. Yeah. So I'm like, here's Paul starting churches all over, and he encounters a lady by the name of Lydia, and we know she's well off, so she's got resources. She's a seller of purple and all of that.
Business owner, operator.
Business owner. Some people, like at this point, think she's a widow. She owns her own house, and so she's well off. And God's going to use her resources to help the church in Philippi launch.
Yeah.
And I go,
which is counterculture. Because why would you take these resources? And because, people were making money off people who were demon possessed. Families were making money off the suffering of their children, and basically getting visions and dreams and all that kind of stuff that's happening in the greater context of the area and the passage. And these guys were disrupting all of that. In that culture, it is counterculture for her to take all of her resources and time and energy and go against what probably the Jewish leaders would be wanting. They would want like an appointed man who's, a man of God with lots of history and lineage. Yeah. And then here's this lady who's going to be the host of the church.
Which is amazing to read about, right? Like, and then I loved how it ended because it says like it says she prevailed upon it. She wants them now to come to her home and stay. And I think what encouraged me most when I read that and dived into it was that the prevailed simply means like she has this gift now of hospitality. So she's a new Christian and she has this gift where she wants to host them in her home, and eventually she'd host the congregation in her home. So I go, when you come to know Jesus, I think your gifts and your abilities just come to light is shining on them, and you're going, wow, like Lydia's now using her gift of hospitality to bless Paul and his team, to bless the church that'll be there in the future.
And that's the encouragement of those that don't feel like because they can't talk in front of a microphone or have sensational gifts and abilities that they're not able to be effective and used in the church, but yet those that are just opening the doors, providing the space, being hospitable, feeding people, whatever it is that she's accomplishing, And after they're put in prison and flogged essentially for preaching the gospel, she's the host. So she's there as the mainstay and the support system, just because she's using her individual gifts. So it's an interesting how that's given to us as an example of everyone has a role and a purpose, and you can use your resources for good or not good. I mean, she's obviously sacrificing resources and her space and reputation. I think that's important too.
Well, absolutely, because she's inviting these men into her home, and I'm sure people would have been talking behind the scenes.
Yep.
Like, what's going on there?
And the government wants them out, and she's the host.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah. And at the end of it all, I think what's super encouraging is, despite the difference of opinion in the fight that Paul and Barnabas get into, like they go off and this is the result, like someone comes to know Jesus, the Spirit's still working. So it gives me a lot of hope to know, like, as a church, a Centerpoint church, we're going to reach people that God is orchestrating, and then other churches in the area and on the island are going to reach people.
And it's not a competition.
Yeah, and Centerpoint could probably, like, if we were thinking it through, we might not be able to reach those people. Right. So that's why I'm grateful for the church at large, because I go, you know, if we had the dream scenario, everybody on PEI came to know Christ, we still wouldn't have enough churches to hold everyone. In the way of, like, have everyone involved in sitting, be it in a service and all of that. So I just go, it's super encouraging to know if churches love Jesus, love the Bible, and they represent Christ, despite even some minor differences on theology, even churches like not liking other churches, whatever the what plays out there, we have a God who can patch that all up. And we're going to see people, for example, coming this Sunday to churches, and they'll be welcomed in. And that's encouraging to know, despite even differences, the Holy Spirit's still at work. So I get encouraged by that.